had. If you want to get people's attention, you want to go lower down the brainstem. Again, a phrase I stole. I didn't make up. And doing faces is a great way to grab and hold someone's attention really, really fast. Hi, my name is Guthrie, and today we're talking about subconscious awareness of being exposed to various stimulus, which I know sounds fancy. It's a lot like brainwashing marketing stuff. But I want to talk about one specific study called Affect, Cognition, and Awareness. Affect priming with optimal and suboptimal stimulus exposures by Murphy and Zajanik. And basically, this study isn't exactly like subliminal messaging or mind control. They just wanted to study whether brief exposure to something could affect how people came to conclusions. And I don't want to get into whether subliminal marketing works or doesn't work, or is good or is bad, or any of that stuff. There are lots of good resources you can check out. Just basically, how do our brains work, and how do we come to conclusions, and can those conclusions be influenced on an unconscious level? Not subconscious, because that doesn't really exist, but on an unconscious level. So here, I'm not going to go through the whole study. I encourage you to read the full blog post to get all the juicy details. But I just want to kind of lay out kind of the lay of the land, so it will make a lot more sense to you. So the first study had two conditions. Okay, half the people were subjected to what they call the optimum exposure, and half to the suboptimal exposure. Now, what they did is they took people and they put them in a room, and they put it under the fake guise that they were going to rate these random Chinese characters. So the participants didn't know what the Chinese characters were, what they meant, and none of that mattered. But right before they saw the characters, in the optimum exposure, they would flash a face on the screen for 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second, either of someone happy or someone angry, either a male or female. And in the suboptimal exposure, they would do the same thing, except the exposure would only be for 4 milliseconds. So really, 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 really fast. And the theory is that you're going to see a difference, because when you show a face for a second, your brain sees the face. There's a part in your brain called the FFA, the fusiform facial area, which is dedicated just for recognizing faces and for knowing if it's someone you know. And so the second you see anything with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, your FFA will light up, and it happens really, really fast. That's why if you see like a Jeep on the, it looks like a face. If you see a smiley face, even though it doesn't look like a human at all, you're just face, right? Emojis, face. We're very good at looking at something and seeing a face in the clouds, or face in the tree, or face in a pancake, like whatever it is. That's the FFA going to work. But it happens really fast, and it happens unconsciously. And so the theory is that if you show someone a face for 1 second, right, you see the face, the FFA goes, it's a face, and then it starts doing stuff, going through these neural pathways in the brain, and you'll end up with a different result than if you see the face for 4 milliseconds and you start the path, but then the stimulus goes away and you can't finish the path. So what they found was obviously very, very interesting. So in the optimal conditions, basically there wasn't a difference. So whether you saw a happy face or a not happy face, or no face at all, or a face that was kind of confusing for a second, there wasn't a difference in how people rated the Chinese characters. So what seems to be happening was the participants would see the face for a second and be like, why is there a face? And then they'd see the character and they'd be like, okay, this is dumb. And they would know to separate the emotion from the face from the character they were seeing. But very interestingly, when in the suboptimal condition, when people saw the negative face, the angry face, they rated the character they rated it lower. And when they saw the happy face, they rated the character higher than either the neutral or the base when there wasn't a face. And people were not aware that they were even seeing a face. So you could ask them, did you see something before the characters, and we're like, no, I didn't see anything, because 4 milliseconds isn't long enough for our brains to process that kind of information. So it was really quite a large difference, which was really, really interesting. So in future studies, they kind of delved deeper, and they wanted to see, for example, if it wasn't just happy, sad, but if there were other stimuluses that they could do that would get similar results. So, for example, in study 3, they had subjects where participants were asked to rate the size of an object, where 1 is small like a mouse and 5 is big like a tree. And then they primed, instead of a face, they primed with a shape. So, for example, some people got a large prime where they were primed with a very big object, and some were primed with a small prime where they were primed with a very small object. And what's really interesting is that in that case, when it came to the optimal condition where people were able to see the prime for a second, right? So let's just say you saw a blobby shape and you had to rate it. Is it 1 small like a mouse or 5 big like a tree? And before that, you saw a picture of a mountain, right? A very large object, a battleship, right? Something very large. And when it was on for a second, people who saw were exposed to the larger shape actually would rate the object as larger. And when they were exposed to the smaller shape, they would rate the object as smaller. So in that case, right, instead of happy, sad, there was a framing effect going on where they'd see something large and then, oh, that's large, and then they'd see something small, and it would frame the kind of bizarre kind of character that they were seeing, that wasn't a real object, and they'd be like, oh, I feel like that's smaller. But what's really interesting is that in the suboptimal case, where they were exposed for only 4 milliseconds, not the 1 second, but the 4 milliseconds, there was no difference. So unlike the faces, where people who were exposed for 4 milliseconds, there was a difference, people who were exposed for 4 milliseconds, no difference whatsoever. And so what's interesting is that, so when you're talking about the brain pathways, large to small, small to large to small, those pathways and that kind of stuff takes longer than 4 milliseconds to process. Whereas faces is one of the first things you see, and so it actually gets processed faster, and so you will see a result. Now, we don't know this for sure. Obviously, the brain is very complex, but this is basically the theory. So when you see a face, right, you see the face quick, right, happy or sad. But 4 milliseconds isn't long enough for you to then do the next step, which is to, feel the emotion. So the FFA fires really, really, really fast. And so the image has to be around long enough for it to move to the next steps. And in the case of large to small, then the image has to be there long enough for those steps to matter. But when it comes to the FFA, you could do it really fast. And because the FFA, the fusiform facial area, just for faces, is really, really sensitive to that, it only needs to be around for a little bit. So, and I'm going to just kind of quote the conclusions. Study 5, they did masculine versus feminine. They did some other stuff. Again, read the post. But I quote from the paper. Quote, primes shown as briefly as 4 milliseconds can allow subjects to discriminate between faces that differ in emotional polarity. Distinct faces that do not differ in affective polarity, even if they differ in such obvious ways as gender, cannot be accurately discriminated from one another if they are exposed for only 4 milliseconds. So what can this tell us? It gives a little clue into how different pathways are firing, and then humans, if you're talking about decision making, we tend to think of decision making as this process that we're in control of, that it's something that, oh, I want to drink the Pepsi. And of course, if you know anything about behavioral economics, you know that there's all these cognitive biases that exist, and people come to conclusions for strange reasons. But you have to remember that the brain is not magical. I mean, in a lot of ways, it feels like magic, but there are steps that are happening in the brain. There are pathways that are happening in the brain. And so depending on which ones you're firing and how you're moving through those pathways, the end result may be different. And so it's, this paper is a great example of how your brain physiology and the brain structures that you have really do influence the decisions you come to. So sometimes it's very hard to know which one to go to if you're trying to end up at a specific decision. But know that depend on how you present material and how you present decisions, you can perhaps have people go through a different pathway, and if they go through a different pathway, they may come to a different result. So it's a very cool study, and doing if you want to get people's attention, if there's one takeaway besides the great takeaway I just had, if you want to get people's attention, you want to go lower down the brainstem. Again, a phrase I stole. I didn't make up. And doing faces is a great way to grab and hold someone's attention really fast. It's one of the easiest ways to know if a company is doing really poorly is if they have ads with babies and dogs. Those pet faces looking straight at the camera, because those get attention really fast, and you know that they're very desperate to have such a brazen ad. So that's kind of how I feel. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, check out the blog post, and I will talk to you later. Bye.